Good morning, Ms. Wenzel. Good morning, everybody. Are you ready? Yes, put on your mic, switch on your mic.
Thank you.
Yes.
Morning, Chair.
Morning.
We're going to lead the evidence of Mr. Sesoko
Yes.
from IPID today. There is a lot of the evidence is corroboration of what Mr. McBride has testified to. We won't spend too much time and go into too much detail and try and provide confirmation where we can.
Yes, okay. No, that's
Thank
fine.
you.
That's fine. Please administer the oath or affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
My name is Matthews Sesoko.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Mr. Sesoko,
Sorry, Ms. Susan,
Yes.
Ms. Wenzel. Before we start, Mr. Sesoko, I am aware, and you would be aware also, that when Mr. McBride was going to give evidence, or when he gave evidence, the Commission became aware that in his evidence he was going to say something about a disciplinary hearing involving you, I think, which was chaired by my younger brother, Advocate Mxolisi Zondo, and that once the Commission was aware of that, it sought views from those who had something to say about that, including you, whether they had any objection to me hearing that evidence. Now, my recollection is that you were among those who said you had no problem with that, and if that is so, I just would like to have that confirmed. Is that so?
I can confirm, Chairperson, I did indicate that I do not have any objection.
Yes.
The Chair hearing that evidence.
Yes. What we did in regard to that issue was to say, to the extent, was to say that I would not hear that evidence insofar as the allegations made against him, that is my younger brother, until I had initiated a process in terms of which I would get submissions as to how I should handle that. But I think everyone, that's yourself, Mr. McBride, Mr. Khuba, I think General Sibia as well, if I'm not mistaken, I think everybody said they had no problem with that, but we decided that we should not necessarily decide it simply on the basis that those affected had no problem. It might need more thought. So that process that was envisaged hasn't happened yet. But I did see when I read your statement that unlike in the case of Mr. McBride's statement, where there seemed to be some suggestion of some suggestion of some kind that Mr. Mxolisi Zondo may have been used or may have been part of a scheme to get rid of certain people. At least that's how I understood part of his statement. That is Mr. McBride's statement. Your statement seemed not to make any such suggestion, but it seemed to simply state the facts that he was the chairperson of the disciplinary inquiry, and when the inquiry was supposed to happen, you did not attend. You were in hospital, or there was a doctor's certificate to say you were not well. Your counsel asked for a postponement, and he refused it, and he went ahead and decided the matter. And as I understand your statement, it leaves everything at that. Is my understanding correct?
Chairperson, that is correct. I didn't take the issue further than that.
I'm sorry. Yes.
It is correct, Chairperson. I didn't take the issue further than that, except to show that, in my view, the way he acted showed bias.
Yes.
Something that would not be expected from an impartial chairperson in a disciplinary inquiry.
Yes. That's as far as you go.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, no, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sesoko, it's correct that you have provided a statement to the Commission.
That is correct.
And the statement that appears in the bundle ahead of you, in front of you, from pages 1 to 20, is that your statement?
That is correct.
Chair, I beg to admit this as Exhibit Y3 into evidence.
The Live Arch file containing the statement affidavit by Mr. Matthews Sesoko will be marked Exhibit Y3.
Thank you.
You will see, Mr. Sesoko, when you open the file in front of you, that it's got page numbers written in red at the top. When Ms. Wenzel refers to pages, you'll see that it says MS 0102. She'll just say page 1, page 2,
Yes,
and
I've-
leave
I've-
out MS and 0. So you.
I've seen that.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Sesoko, how long have you been employed at IPID? It originally was the Independent Complaints Directorate. If you could just explain that to the Chair.
I've been employed by IPID, formerly ICD, since the institution was established on the 1st of April 1997. I held positions from junior management, senior management, junior management, middle management, senior management, up to executive management, where I am now currently.
And at the time that you were approached to investigate the rendition matter, which we'll deal with in due course, what position did you hold?
Initially, when the matter came to our attention, I was the acting national head of investigations at IPID, and I eventually got appointed to the position, in a permanent position, as the national head of investigations at IPID.
Thank you.
Maybe just to refresh my memory on the structure of IPID. You've got the director, executive director of IPID at the top,
That is correct, Chair.
and then you have got national head of investigations.
That is correct.
And then what else have you got in terms of the structure?
Then you have other program managers. Like,
On the same level as national head of investigations?
that is correct.
Okay,
And then you have, you have the other program managers, different programs. Currently, we have 4 programs in the organizations, and including the CFO is also part of the executive management.
okay,
And then you have the provincial heads
yes.
that report to me as the national head of investigations.
Okay, so would the head of each program have provincial people, a provincial person who reports to them?
No, no.
Or only the
Only
the national head of
all the,
investigations?
yes, all the provincial heads reports to the national head of investigations.
Oh, okay, okay. So would the national head of investigations be like the second in command, or one of those who are immediately below the executive director?
I'm one of those who are immediately below the
Below the-
executive
okay.
director. I report directly to the executive director.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is it correct that in the circumstances we're going to deal with in your evidence, you were dismissed on the 16th of August 2016 and then ultimately reinstated on the 23rd of November 2016?
That is correct.
Mrs. Sesoko, could you please tell the chair when you were first approached to deal with the rendition matter, to investigate the rendition of the Zimbabwe nationals by members of the South African police force back to Zimbabwe?
The matter was first brought to my attention by the then executive director of IPID, Mr. Beekman, who had informed me that he was approached by the Minister of Police, then Minister Natim Tetwa, that IPID must investigate this matter. As at the time I was the acting national head of investigation, he requested me to put up a team that would investigate this matter. And I then appointed Mr. Innocent Khuba to lead the team that investigated this matter. Mr. Beekman further advised me that we are supposed to meet with the minister and the then Secretary of Police, Ms. Jenny Pogoshiani, to discuss this issue and so that they can hand over the investigation to us. And indeed, we went to a meeting where such an investigation was supposed to be handed over to us by the minister and the Secretary of Police. However, when we arrived at the meeting, we only found the Secretary of Police, who then informed us that the minister had said we should hold off, and that when he's ready to hand over the investigation to us, the investigation will be handed over to us. It was myself, Mr. Beekman, and Mr. Khuba who had attended that meeting. And that was the last time we heard about this matter.
Was it normal for the minister to request IPID to investigate certain matters?
Yes, it is normal.
It is normal.
Even our Act
Yes.
makes provision for the fact that the
Yes.
minister may refer investigations to IPID.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mrs. Sesoko, just so we can get a timeline, is it correct that this occurred during October 2011?
That is correct.
So when did you next hear about the investigation?
It was about a year later, I think it should have been October, around October 2012,
Yes.
when Colonel Mukangwe from Crime Intelligence came to my office with a docket and indicated to me that he had been requested by the minister to hand over this docket to IPID so that it can be investigated. By virtue of the fact that the instruction came to from the minister, from what Mr. Colonel Mukangwe had informed me. I then took the docket to the then acting executive director, Ms. Kukimbeki, and informed her about the approach by Colonel Mukangwe and handed over the docket to her. I further informed her about the engagement earlier, a year earlier, between myself and the former executive director, Mr. Piekman, and the fact that at that point we were told to hold off by the minister, and that I had, in fact, appointed Mr. Khuba to lead that investigation. After I had handed over the docket to Ms. Kukimbeki, about a week later, Ms. Mbeki came back to me with the docket and indicated that I must hand over the docket to Mr. Khuba to investigate.
What was your understanding at that stage of what IPID was required to investigate? What was this rendition? What did you understand what exactly was being required?
Yes, the issue of the rendition was already in the media around that period.
Yes.
And I think there was also some a parliamentary discussion about it, or parliamentary question that was asked that had to be responded to. So we understood that the investigation was supposed to be around how the Zimbabwean nationals were renditioned to Zimbabwe, unlawful, and were later allegedly killed in Zimbabwe.
Okay.
Is it usual for crime intelligence to conduct an investigation?
No, it's not usual. Crime intelligence, by nature of their work, they do not conduct investigation. They gather intelligence and hand over the product of the intelligence to investigators who then conduct investigations.
And Mr. Sesoko, you've suggested in your statement that people at crime intelligence may have had a conflict of interest. Could you explain that to the chair?
Well, the members of crime intelligence themselves were involved in the rendition or the allegations of rendition. So that is why we're saying that they may have been conflicted themselves in investigating this matter.
Then, Mr. Sesoko, you say in your statement that you were told by Mr. Khuba that Ms. Mbeki had instructed you to keep this matter away from you and to deal only with Colonel Mukankwe and to keep his involvement secret. Can you just explain that?
That is correct, Chair. What had happened was that as per usual, as the National Head of Investigation, in an investigation of this nature, which is a national investigation, I'm ordinarily involved in guiding that investigations, and all investigators report to me on such investigations. And when I spoke to Mr. Khuba about this issue, trying to find out where or how far he is on the investigation after the matter was allocated to him, that's when he made me aware that he had received a specific instruction that I should not be involved in the investigation, and that he should report directly to Ms. Mbeki on the investigation. And then, which was very strange to me, because that is very unusual, because I'm always involved in such investigation. However, because it was an instruction from my superior, I advised Mr. Khuba that he must comply with that instruction. I didn't understand why it had to be that way, and particularly because I had always believed that I enjoyed a good working relationship with Ms. Mbeki. I didn't understand why such instruction was given to Mr. Khuba.
Mr. Sesoko, did you ever meet the people who were involved in the investigation, who Mr. Khuba was working with?
That is correct. There was an occasion when Mr. Khuba approached me and indicated that he's uncomfortable about the fact that he's the only person who deals with people involved in the investigation, including the prosecutors from the MPA. So he wanted me to know who these people were. As a result of that, he then arranged that I meet with them. And then we met with them at a Petroport garage on the N1. And then I was able to meet then Advocate Musing and Advocate Mwelezi. Colonel Mukango was also a part of that meeting. And basically, there isn't much that we discussed at that meeting, except for them to indicating that they were happy in the way in which Mr. Khuba was investigating this matter, and that since his involvement in the investigation, there has been a lot of progress in the investigation.
Thank you. What was your next involvement with the investigation?
My next involvement with the investigation was after Mr. McBride was appointed as the Executive Director to IPID. Upon his appointment, Mr. McBride asked that we brief him on all high-profile investigations that we were conducting. So I briefed him on the investigation, for instance, that I was conducting against the then National Commissioner of Police, Ms. Rea Pierre, General Pierre, and Khuba briefed him on the rendition, and the other investigators briefed him on the Katomena investigation and so forth. And after that brief, we then had another meeting where Mr. McBride had indicated what Mr. Khuba had informed him about what had happened with the investigation and the difficulties he has had when he was investigating this matter. And he then henceforth instructed that I should be involved in the investigation, as I should have been in the first place. And that's when I got involved again with the investigation.
And
Let's just get the timelines again. It was around October or something in 2011 when you heard from Mr. Beukman that there was an investigation that the minister wanted to be done.
That is correct, yeah.
Yes. And more or less a year lapsed without anything happening.
That is correct, yeah.
So that would take us to around towards end of 2012.
2012, that's correct.
Yes. And Mr. McBride was appointed round about, when was it, 2012 or 2013? Or you might not be able to...
it said the 4th of March 2014.
March 2014, that was the
Yes.
appointment of Mr. McBride.
Okay. Now, when Mr. McBride was appointed, Mr. Khuba was already busy with the investigation, is that right?
That is correct, yeah.
Mr. Khuba had begun the investigation round about when, if you are able to remember?
As I've indicated,
About
that
towards end of 2012?
around late 2012. yes.
Late 2012, okay, no, that's fine. I just wanted to get the timelines. So late 2012, Mr. Khuba gets assigned to this investigation, and when Mr. McBride is appointed in 2014, there's a meeting when all of you brief him on high-profile matters.
That is correct.
Yes, okay, you may continue.
Thank you. If we can just go a little bit back in the timeline, just before McBride was appointed, were you involved in taking warning statements from Generals Dramat, Sabia and Libya?
I did not take the statements. What had happened was that Mr. Khuba had approached me to say that he needed to approach the generals, Dramat, Sabia, and I think also General Libya, to interview them and obtain their statements. But he felt uncomfortable doing it on his own because of their seniority, so he wanted me to facilitate that. I informed him that because of the instruction he had, he needed to go to the acting executive director and get approval if he wanted my assistance in that regard, which Mr. Khuba did, and he accordingly got approval in writing from the former acting executive director, Mr. Kukumbeki, that I can assist in facilitating that, which I accordingly did. I facilitated the meeting with General Dramat, General Sabia, and General Libya, and even accompanied him to a meeting with General Dramat and General Libya, where he had indicated to them that he needed their statements and so forth, and which they subsequently provided to him.
Thank you. Now, once Mr. McBride had instructed you to become involved in this investigation, did you work with Mr. Khuba to prepare a report?
That is correct.
And could you explain
what
happened, yes?
What had happened is that upon Mr. McBride indicating that I must get involved with the completion of the investigation, because Mr. Khuba had already indicated to us that he had received further evidence which he needed to include in the docket, and the docket at that point was already with the NPA, and he had written to Advocate Musi requesting the docket so that he can add the further evidence that he had obtained. And then McBride then said Mr. Khuba can proceed and do what he had intended to do even before he was appointed. And Mr. Khuba proceeded to get the docket from the NPA, and then after he received the docket, we had met in my office to discuss the evidence that he had obtained, further evidence that he obtained, including the evidence that was already there in the docket. And we looked at the evidence, the totality of the evidence, and what could be sustained for criminal prosecution and what could not be sustained. And on the basis...
I'm sorry, let me interrupt you. At that stage, there was no report as such, or was there a report that had already been given to the NPA, as far as you remember?
Chair, when I engaged with Mr. Khuba at that point, I wasn't aware that there was a report that
had already been
submitted to the NPA. I only became aware later.
But
I'm aware that Mr. Khuba had always done
various reports.
Various progress reports.
Yes.
Which reports would go to also the Minister of Police.
Yes.
In fact, at some point he would email me a report. I remember a specific report that he emailed me requesting that I transmit it to the Secretary of Police for onward transmission to the Minister of Police.
Yes. And you certainly are speaking about those interim reports, progress reports being made prior to Mr. McBride asking you to be involved?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
That's correct.
So there had been a number of interim reports, progress reports.
That is correct.
Which had been sent to the NPA and had been forwarded to the Secretary of the Police to pass on to the Minister.
That is correct.
Okay, all right. Then you may proceed. I interrupted you when you were, I think, dealing with the question of the two of you, that is yourself and Mr. Khuba, looking at the docket.
Yeah.
Because Mr. Khuba said he had obtained other evidence. I think you can proceed from there.
Yes. So we looked at then the totality of the evidence that was there. Mr. Khuba would sit on my desk and type in the report that we were working on, and then after we've analyzed the evidence, then we concluded the report, and based on our analysis of the available evidence at the time, we came to the conclusion that there wasn't enough evidence to come to the conclusion that there was any misconduct or any criminality that can be proven on the part of General Sibiya and General Dramat. And that's exactly what our report recommended. We did, however, recommend criminal prosecution and disciplinary action against one Colonel Maluleke, who was the active player in the whole rendition saga.
And where did he belong to in terms of structures? Did he belong to crime intelligence? Did he belong to, is there a unit to which he belonged? The one against whom you made?
General Maluleke was, he was a member of the DPCI, the Hawks.
Oh, he was a member of the Hawks?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. Of which General Dramat was the head at the time?
Of which General Dramat was the head, and General Sibiya was the provincial head.
In Gauteng?
In Gauteng.
Okay, thank you.
And did General Maluleke have a nickname that you know of?
Colonel Maluleke was called Cowboy, was popularly known as Cowboy.
Cowboy?
Cowboy, yes.
Oh, okay.
Just before we move on...
I'm sorry. Otherwise, what was his name?
Colonel Maluleke.
Yeah, did you have a name? That's the surname. Or you don't know the surname?
Sorry, Chair, I don't know his name. Okay. I don't remember his name.
You just knew the...
Everyone called him Cowboy.
Okay, all right.
Because he wears a cowboy hat, so that's how everyone identified him.
Oh, okay, all right.
In paragraph 17, if you can just go back to that for a moment. You say on the 23rd of January 2014, you received an interim report by Mr. Khuba for onward transmission to the Secretariat of the Police. Could you just explain that?
That is correct. As I've indicated earlier, Chair, that that would be one of those progress reports that Mr. Khuba used to send to the NPA and as well as the Secretariat. So on this occasion, he had emailed this report to me with a request that I must ensure that the report is submitted to the Secretary of Police for onward transmission to the Ministry.
And did you consider the report at that time?
No, I did not consider the report, particularly because of the fact that I was not supposed to be involved in the investigation. So when I received the email, I had I printed out the report and had it sent to the Secretary of Police.
Now, in paragraph 22, you say on the 18th of March 2014, you and Mr. Khuba finalized your report. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then was that submitted to Mr. McBride for his approval?
That is correct. This is in line with our own standard operating procedures as well as our regulation. So once we had concluded the report, as the supervisor to Mr. Khuba, I had to quality check the report and sign off on the report, and the executive director would then approve the report for submission to the NPA.
And who at the NPA was the report sent to?
The report was sent to the former NTPP, Mr. Ngasana. We had in fact had a meeting prior to that with the NTPP, myself and the Executive Director, Mr. McBride, and some of the discussions in that meeting was surrounding this issue of the rendition, and we assured him that once we had concluded on it, then we will forward the report to him, which we did.
Can I take you back to paragraph 17 of your affidavit? You say, on 23 January 2014, I received an interim report from Mr. Khuba via email for onward transmission to the Secretariat of Police. Because of my exclusion from the investigation, I did not consider the report. However, I have subsequently learned that the report sent to me was an amended version of the report which had initially been sent to Advocate Musing, recommending that both Generals Sibia and Ramat be charged. However, after sending this report to Advocate Musing, I'm informed that Mr. Khuba obtained cellular phone evidence which excluded General Sibia, and he accordingly deleted his recommendation that General Sibia be charged. There you talk about two reports. One, you talk about the interim report that you received from Mr. Khuba on 23 January. But you say that report, if I understand you correctly, was an amended version of an earlier report that Mr. Khuba had sent to Advocate Musing. Is my understanding correct so far?
That is correct, Chair.
Yes.
I became aware of the report that Mr. Khuba had sent to Advocate Musing only in January of 2015.
Yes.
After the minister had suspended General Ramat, and after the minister had, at the time when he suspended General Ramat, it indicated that it was on the basis of the IPID report, and in January, the minister had said that it was on the basis of IPID report, which the executive director, Mr. McBride, had disputed, which was factually correct because we had not recommended any criminal charge or disciplinary charge against General Ramat. And then in January, there was then a media inquiry by a journalist, Mzilikazi Africa, to our national spokesperson. And he then forwarded to him the last page of the report, which showed the recommendation that General Ramat and Sibia must be prosecuted. And that report was signed by Mr. Khuba. And that was the first time that I became aware of such a report, which I subsequently called Mr. Khuba to account about the report.
But you say that was in January 2015?
January 2015, yes.
And here in paragraph 17, you refer to what happened in January 2014 when you received that interim report from Mr. Khuba. You're sure that there is no mistake? There was a year after you received that interim report before you became aware of that other?
Yes, hence I
report?
say in the statement that I later became aware.
Yes, yes, no, I understand that. I'm just wondering why you were not made aware for such a long period of it, but there may be an explanation. I thought that because here in paragraph 17, as I understand what you are saying is, on the 23rd of January, you received an interim report from Mr. Khuba.
Yes,
And when you received that interim report, you say you subsequently learned that this report that you were receiving in January 2014 was an amended version of a report that had been sent already to Advocate Musing, recommending that Generals Sibia and Dramat be charged. When you say subsequently, are you referring to January 2015?
yes. I'm referring to January 2015,
Oh,
when I
okay.
first became aware
Oh.
that there was now this report.
Yes.
So
So all this time you were not aware of
all this
it,
time, both myself and Mr. McBride were not aware.
but you were aware that Mr. Khuba had sent some
Some progress
reports,
yes.
but you were not aware of what the content of those reports at that time.
Yes, we were not aware that there was a report
Yes.
that recommended that
Yes.
General Dramat and General Sibia
charged.
must be charged.
Now, this interim report that you were receiving from Mr. Khuba, you received from Mr. Khuba in January 2014. I understand from paragraph 17 that it was saying that General Sibia should not be charged. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But you don't at that stage say anything about what it may have said about General Dramat.
The report,
That report.
yes, that
Yeah.
report, as I said, subsequently we've learned, that report, the interim report,
Yes.
did recommend that General Dramat be charged.
Oh, okay. So this.
But it excluded, that is the
Sibia.
interim report, it excluded General Sibia.
Yes. Okay. So as far as you were concerned in January 2014, after receiving this interim report, the understanding was the report says General Sibia should not be charged. But as far as General Dramat was concerned, it was saying he should be charged.
That was what the report was saying.
That's
Chair.
what the report was saying.
Yes.
Okay. But what you are saying is later in January 2015, you discovered that there had been another report which you was saying both of them should be charged.
That is correct, Chair.
Yes. Okay. No, thank you. I understand now.
Thank you. And just to clarify what the chair has put to you, when you received the report of 23 January 2014, you didn't read that report.
Like I said, I did not engage with the report.
Yes.
So it was just for me to pass it over. So all these facts became more clearer to me when in January these issues started being raised. Then we started engaging with all these issues. Then we realized that actually there are these reports that are contradicting.
Yes,
basically.
yes. Okay, all right.
Mr. Sesoko, if we can just deal with the events that happened before January 2015 when we found out about this other report signed by Mr. Khuba. Could you explain what the reference group was that you referred to in paragraph 24 and what dealings you had with this group?
I'm sorry, Mr. Vensel, you might have dealt with this, but I'm not sure. I think you did, but I think I was focusing on something else. You did refer to paragraph 22. Paragraph 22, Mr. Sesoko says that on the 18th of March 2014, you and Mr. Khuba finalized a report which recommended that no charges be brought against General Dramat or General Sibia, as there was no credible evidence to support any charges against them, which was sent to Ms. McBride, and Ms. McBride made some grammatical changes, and after it corrected it, Mr. Khuba and I signed the report and then resubmitted it to Mr. McBride for his approval. My question is, as you were working on this report together now,
Yes.
that is yourself and Mr. Khuba, and making this recommendation that Generals Sibia and Dramat should not be charged because there is no credible evidence, did Mr. Khuba not mention to you that, earlier on, I had sent a report which said both of them must be charged?
No.
But now I'm convinced that they should not be charged. Did he not mention that?
No. He did not mention that there was such a report that was sent to
The NPA?
to Advocate Musi.
Yes.
However, we did discuss the issue of whether there is evidence that can sustain the charging of these generals. That was part of the discussions I had with Mr. Khuba when we were evaluating the evidence. And at the end, we came to the conclusion that there wasn't such. For instance, some of the issues we discussed was the issue of the charging of General Dramat and his initial view that General Dramat must be charged and what the basis thereof was, which in our discussion became clear that it was a basis of a witness statement which, after he himself had engaged experts to do an analysis of the statement, the report came with the conclusion that that statement was deceptive because the witness had already passed on at the time. So these are the discussions that we had, and based on that we said, but given the evidence that we have and other witness statement, we cannot sustain the charge against General Sibia. I mean General Dramat, and
Yes.
which conclusion we put in our report that we both signed.
Later on, a year later or so, when you heard about this earlier recommendation that about the report that had said both of them must be charged, did it surprise you that Mr. Khuba had not mentioned this to you when you were working on the final report and saying these two should not be charged? That he didn't say, by the way, I had made an earlier report where I'd been convinced that they should be charged, and I'd recommended that they should be charged, but now I think that there is further evidence and they should not be charged.
Chair, indeed, I was surprised. When we got to that media inquiry, we even suspected that the signature of Mr. Khuba
Had been forged.
has been forged.
Yes, you didn't believe it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I immediately called Mr. Khuba and said, we've just received this thing from
The media.
The media, Sunday Times, journalist Mr. Ligas, and there's a report that is signed by you saying this. And Mr. Khuba could not immediately remember that. But when what I said to him was that you need to come to head office so that we discuss this, because it's different from what we
recommended.
We have recommended. And I asked him, go back to your records and check what happened in this regard. And then indeed he came to head office, and when he came he had already gone to his records And then he remembered what had happened and the circumstances surrounding the sending of that report to Advocate Musi. And then he explained to myself and McBride the circumstances surrounding this report.
Well, I don't know, but it doesn't seem to me like something you should forget having done. I know that you might not be able to comment, and Mr. Khuba will give evidence later. I'm just thinking that it would be something that you could easily remember that, yes, I did send an earlier report where I recommended that they be charged, but that was on the basis of the evidence that was available then, and so on.
Chair, from my recollection in terms of my discussion with Mr. Khuba, because he has been sending a lot of reports to both the NPA and the Secretariat as progress reports, what he did not recall was that there was a report which he signed where he made specifically those recommendations that both Sibia and Dramad should be charged. So that is the explanation he gave to us. In relation to the issue of General Dramad, I mean, as I said, that in our discussion that came up, and the issue of the recommendation that he be charged, and which we discussed based on the further evidence that he has obtained and whether it can sustain a criminal charge against General Sibia, which he came to the conclusion that it could not. So as to how at the time he could not remember the signed report to General to Advocate Musi, I think Mr. Khuba would be able to explain.
Yes, no, I understand. Yes, Ms. Wenzel.
Mr. Sesoko, if we can go to paragraph 24 on page 6 of the bundle.
Yeah.
Could you just explain the reference group and the dealings that you had with this reference group?
Chair, what had happened was around November 2014, Mr. McBride called us into a meeting to say the people from the ministry, a reference group that was appointed to the minister that wanted to have a meeting with us. In the meeting, it was myself, Mr. Khuba and Mr. McBride, and the members of the reference group, one of whom is Advocate Matenjo of the NPA. There were other 2 or 3 members. I can't remember their names. There was a white lady. I can't remember her name. And then in the meeting, they indicated to us that they were appointed by the Minister of Police, Minister Nadim Teto at the time, Nadim Tleko at the time, to look at issues within the SAPS. And the discussion surrounded also, or mainly, the rendition investigation that was conducted. And then we briefed them about the rendition investigation and how we came to the conclusion that we came to. And then after that meeting, I think it was a day or so later, Mr. Khuba informed me that he was called by Advocate Matenjo requesting the rendition docket, to which Mr. Khuba referred him to the Executive Director, Mr. McBride, that he must request the docket from Mr. McBride. And from what I learned from Mr. Khuba, then Mr. Matenjo said, no, I'll find it my other ways. And a few days later, we then received a letter from the Minister of Police, Mr. Innocent Khuba, requesting the rendition docket. The letter was received by the Executive Director, of course. Then he called me into a meeting with him and informed me that he just received this letter from the Minister and asked for my advice. I read the letter and I indicated to Mr. McBride that it's inappropriate for the Minister to ask for a docket of our investigation. But however, at the time we didn't know the intentions. So I advised Mr. McBride that maybe the Minister wants to do the right thing in relation to this issue. So diplomatically, let's write to him indicating that, in fact, you're not supposed to have this, but we believe you'll do the right thing with this docket and the recommendation. So I packaged the copies of the docket and the report that we had already sent to the NPA, and the letter, I advised on the letter with the Executive Director, and we sent the letter with the docket to the Minister.
This was now around what time?
That was around November 2014.
Long after the report that you and Mr. Khuba prepared together had been sent to the Minister, to
NPA.
the NPA.
That is correct.
Yes.
That is correct.
And would it also have been sent to the Police Secretariat or only to the NPA?
No, we only sent to the NPA.
Okay. And he didn't want a report or a progress report or anything. He wanted the entire docket.
He wanted the entire docket.
Yes.
He wanted the entire docket. The letter was very clear that he wanted the entire docket. In fact, if my recollection serves me well, they even miswrote the docket reference number there, but we were aware that they were referring specifically to
the rendition
to this
fund.
docket. I think it was just an error when they made reference to the docket.
Okay.
Mr. Sesoko, can you explain, you make reference to it in paragraph 27, what happened a month later in December 2014?
So, Chair, in December 2014, General Dramat was suspended by the Minister. I actually saw that on the news, and to our surprise, the Minister has indicated that the suspension of General Dramat was on the basis of the investigation and the report by IPID. It took us by surprise because our recommendation did not recommend any action against General Dramat. Now, when the Executive Director was approached by the media to respond to this issue, then he indicated that the IPID report did not recommend any action against General Dramat. And I think that's when now the conflict between the Executive Director and the Minister started, because that's when now in January we're then confronted with this other report which Mr. Khuba had signed, which report was sent to Advocate Musi, from what Mr. Khuba told us. So as far as we're concerned, the only report that went to the Minister is the report where we exonerated General Dramat and General Sibia. So we don't know how the Minister would have got this report from Mr. Khuba, except, of course, if he had interacted with Advocate Musi.
Mrs. Sesoko, do you remember when McBride was then suspended? Is it correct? It's March 2015.
That is correct. Mr. McBride was suspended in March 2015.
And who was appointed to act in his place?
So, I'm sorry, Ms. Wenzel. So, General Dramat was suspended in December 2014,
That's correct.
and the following month, namely January 2015, Mr. McBride was also suspended
No, in March.
in March.
In March
Oh,
2015.
okay, thank you. Yes,
And upon Mr. McBride's suspension by the minister, Mr. Khamanyani, who was the provincial head for Free State and was reporting to me, was appointed to act as the executive director of IPID.
so, I think you said earlier on that immediately below the position of executive director of IPID, there are a number of positions occupied by various people, including yourself.
That's correct.
Those would be the people immediately below the executive director,
That is correct. In our structure, we call them program managers.
Program managers.
Yes.
Would that apply to you as well?
Yes,
that term?
I'm part of.
You're part
those.
of that, yes. And that's about how many people?
It is 4 people.
About 4 people.
Yes.
Yes, so none of these
No,
people.
actually, sorry, Chair, actually it's 5 people, including the CFO.
The 5 people, including the CFO.
Yes.
So out of these 5 people immediately below the executive director, none of them was appointed to act in the position of executive director.
That is correct, Chair.
And the person who was appointed to act in the position of director, was he on the next level below the level of program managers?
That is correct.
Yes.
In terms of levels in the public service, we are all on the same level
Yes.
as chief directors.
Yes,
However, in terms of the structure in
Of
the
IPID.
organization,
yes,
we are executive management
Yes.
as program managers.
yes, yes.
And then you then have the provincial heads
Yes.
that run the provinces.
Yes,
And the delegation to me by the executive director was that I must supervise all the provincial heads.
yes. Does what you have just said mean that a provincial head is also at the
Yes.
level of chief director?
Yes,
Okay, so in terms of public service, you might all be on the same level.
yes,
But in terms of the structure of IPID, you are not on the same level as a
No.
provincial head.
no, we
They-
are higher.
Yeah, you are higher.
Yes.
And provincial heads report to you.
Yes,
So you, from that point of view,
yes,
those who are on program managers
yes,
are superiors to those who are provincial heads.
that is correct.
Yeah, so the person who was appointed to act was at provincial head level.
That is correct.
So about 5 people who could have been.
Potentially been-
Yeah, potentially been,
They were ignored.
were ignored.
That's correct.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. After Mr. Khamanyani was appointed, what then happened?
Immediately upon his appointment as the acting executive director, Mr. Khamanyani then instructed myself and Mr. Khuba to attend to an interview with the Werksman's attorneys, which the minister had appointed to investigate in our understanding the issue surrounding the 2 reports. What it's now known as the so-called first
report and second report. Yes.
Yes,
Of course, the second report being the final one
that is correct.
that you and Mr. Khuba put together,
That is correct.
and the so-called first report being the one where which Mr. Khuba did by
Only
himself,
Mr. Khuba signed.
where he recommended that both General Dramat and General Sbiya be charged.
That is correct.
Yes, okay.
And did you attend an interview at Worksman's Attorneys?
Yes, Chair, I did, because it was an instruction from my superior. And upon attending that interview, which was led by an attorney from Werksman, Mr. Sandile July, I specifically inquired, before we even started the interview, what the purpose of the interview is, and whether am I being investigated for any wrongdoing, whether it be criminal or misconduct, to which Mr. July and his team indicated that it was not the purpose of the interview. The purpose was simply for the minister to understand the circumstances surrounding these two reports. I then agreed to participate in that interview on those bases.
Well, before you proceed, Mr. Sesoko, please clarify this for me. The minister had two reports. The one we call for convenience the first report, the other one being the second or final report. And of course, the one that we call the first report, based on what you have told me, might not really have been the first report, because there were a number of reports. But it's the one where Mr. Khuba recommended that General Dramat and General Sbiya be charged.
That's correct.
Had the minister asked you through whatever channels, through the executive director or through whoever, before asking a law firm to investigate, ask you to explain what he did not understand? Did he ask you to explain what he did not understand, which seems to have been one report saying General Dramat and General Sbiya should be charged, and another one saying they should not be charged?
Chair, you see, exactly what you are saying, that's what was surprising to us. Because we would have expected that the minister would have approached the executive director as a person reporting directly to him to report, to explain the circumstances surrounding this report. In our view, there was no need to even appoint a law firm to investigate this issue. This was a simple operational issue that could have been explained properly to the minister.
Yes.
That is why later, because of the events that happened, it became clear to us what the intention was.
Because I grappled with this quite a lot when Mr. McBride was giving evidence, and of course it was he was the first witness to deal with it, other than what one has read in the media in the past. I would have thought that the first thing you do if people, under you, under a structure that's under you, if they have done something that you don't understand, the first thing is to ask them to explain to you. And if their explanation is not satisfactory, then maybe you can make certain decisions.
That is correct, Chair. And
I don't understand why it was not done.
Yes. Exactly. That that is why we were puzzled how this issue was handled. Even the fact that the appointment of Wertsmans and that us as employees of IPID
Must go to a law firm.
go to a law firm and discuss this thing. I mean, Mr. Khuba will testify about this, that he was approached directly by first the lawyer from the law firm without engaging the department internally to say, we've been appointed, we want you to come before us. Only when Mr. Khuba refused to cooperate with them, then, and informed them that I'm his supervisor and McBride is the head of the institution, they must consult those people. That's when we received an email from this attorney, Sandile July, to say he wants to interview Mr. Khuba. And in the email, Mr. McBride's email address was wrongly spelled on the email, so Mr. McBride did not receive the email, but I received the email. And I responded to the attorney to say, look, this can only be sanctioned by Mr. McBride, and you have the email that you put there of Mr. McBride is wrong. He has the correct email address. So Mr. Khuba was continuously being pestered to get him to go and talk to these lawyers. And I suspect because of the frustration that Mr. Khuba was refusing to do so and said it must go through a proper process departmentally. And my view is that the minister saw it fit that he suspend Mr. McBride so that it's easy then to gain access to us.
But also, I guess we'll get to the report, but it seems to be accepted by all concerned that the so-called first report was only signed by one person, Mr. Khuba.
That is correct, yeah.
You did not sign it.
I did not sign
Mr.
it.
McBride did not sign it.
Mr. McBride did
So
not sign that
if the two of you only signed the final, the second report, I mean the three of you.
us, yes.
Yes. And therefore, if anybody was, if there was supposed to be an explanation from anybody, it must have been Khuba, Mr. Khuba, who had signed both, but not people who signed one.
That is correct, Chair. From our standpoint, and after engagement with Mr. Khuba, we understood the circumstances. Remember that I've already indicated that I was not supposed to be involved. But once Mr. Khuba started explaining the events surrounding this investigation and the kind of pressures that he was put through, I mean, Chair, every little thing, after Mr. Khuba received some evidence that seemed to suggest some wrongdoing against General Dramat, and sharing that evidence with Mukangwe and the team that he was working with, it will immediately be leaked to the media. You know, so it was clear that there was an orchestrated effort to put General Dramat in a bad light.
Yes.
I would want to venture to say, Chair, that had our report found wrongdoing, or if we had succumbed and manipulated the evidence and the facts and made a conclusion that a general dramat must be charged for any wrongdoing, we wouldn't have found ourselves in the situation that we found ourselves.
Yes. Okay, I think we should take the tea break at this stage. We are 20 past. We'll take the tea break and then we'll resume at 25 to 12. But before we do that, Ms. Wenzel, I'm not sure, but I think there was some litigation involving Mr. Sesoko. Was there some litigation following your dismissal? Was there some litigation, court case?
Yes, there were a number of litigations. Chair.
There are.
Yes.
I understand that your reinstatement was a result of a settlement, is that right?
Yes,
Yes.
through a bargaining council.
Yes. So there was no arbitration award or judgment that was given?
It was an arbitration award.
There was an arbitration award.
Yes.
Have you got it, Ms. Wenzel?
Yes.
Is it here?
Yes, it is.
Oh, because I said, I think last week, and I'm just going to say it again, please share this information with all members of the legal team. In regard to any witness where there has been a judgment, there has been litigation that may be related to what we are talking about, we must have that, and I must be advised in advance so that I can read that judgment. But also, it's important to look at judgments because there may be findings that have already been made and
Yes.
conclusions that have been made which are not being challenged further by other parties, which might be important that we understand as the particular witness is being led, because those findings might be standing so that we are all alive to it. So I think if we get that arbitration award to be part of the bundle, that would be important
Yes,
as soon as possible.
Yes, I think that arbitration award is part of the bundle. I'll take it to you in
You'll
in
check,
due
yeah.
course.
Okay, all right. Okay, we'll adjourn now for the tea break, and I move that we'll return at 22:12. We adjourn.
All rise.
Let's proceed.
Chair, before the tea adjournment, you were asking me about the judgment and the disciplinary proceedings. I have misinformed you because I got confused between the disciplinary proceedings and the arbitration proceedings. We have got the judgment in the disciplinary proceedings, not the arbitration proceedings, but we are getting it, and I'm sure by lunchtime we'll be able to provide it to you.
Yes, that's fine, but also see if there are any other judgments relating to him.
Yes.
About whether it's a suspension or dismissal or whatever that may be relevant
Yes.
to what we are looking into. Let's get all of them.
Yes, we will.
Same thing with other witnesses in regard to this sector and in regard to others, so that we have a full picture.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll do that. Before the adjournment, we were dealing with the interview that you attended with Worksmans. Is it correct that you recorded that interview?
That is correct, Chair. I recorded the interview.
And if you have a look at Annexure MS1 on page 22, is that the transcript of the recording?
That is correct, Chair.
And did Worksmans also record this interview?
That is correct, Chair. Worksmans also recorded. What had happened was that before we started, they put a recording on the table to say they're recording the interview. I said, okay, it's fine, but I also want to record the interview, and I also put my recorder to record the interview.
Now, if you have a look at the bottom of page 23, you will see it's reflected there. Mr. Sesoko, I think first of all what I want to raise is I want to know the status of the inquiry. And Mr. Tom, okay. Mr. Sesoko, whether I am here as a suspect in a criminal investigation or a disciplinary investigation, because when I went through the terms of reference, the minister says you must investigate whether there was a misconduct or crime committed. So I need to establish what my status is. And Mr. Tom, yes, you stated, Mr. Sesoko, you are not a suspect in criminal proceedings or proceedings to be conducted, to be either conducted by the minister or IPID for that matter. This investigation is to understand as to why do we have these two reports which have conflicting information in a way which have recommendations that are different. Mr. Sesoko, okay. Mr. Tom, you know, so our mandate is to establish those facts you know. Mrs. Sesoko, all right. Mr. Tom, as to why do we have the two different investigation reports? Mr. Sesoko, okay. Mr. Tom, yes. Mr. Sesoko, no, it's fine. Okay, Mr. Sesoko, like I said before you posed a question on the status and the purpose of the investigation. We had consulted with Mr. Innocent Khuba. Is that a true reflection?
That is correct, because I asked specifically this because I needed to understand what is it that they were looking at, and so that if it's an investigation that has to look at issues of misconduct against me or any criminal inquiry against me, then I can have proper legal representation to engage in that process. But because of the assurance that they gave me, that it is not about that, but only to understand how the reports came about, then that was the only basis I participated in that process. That is why I was taken aback when the report now comes and recommended that I be charged.
When did you first learn about the Worksman's report? You can go back to paragraph 35 of your statement, page 9.
The report...
Well, I'm sorry, Ms. Wenzel, I would deliberately jumping to the report before finalizing the discussion at the meeting that he had with the workmen's team.
Yes, we can, I'll go back, thank you, Chair. What did you tell the Worksman's team after that about the two reports?
Chair, I explained to them, as my earlier testimony said, about how the two reports
Came about.
As I had earlier explained, my engagement with Mr. Khuba and the fact that there was further evidence that was obtained by Mr. Khuba, and that was the basis on which we analyzed the evidence with Mr. Khuba and came to the conclusions as we did. And the fact that I was not aware, and if you go through the transcript and even their report, you will realize that they even say in their report, I refuse to engage them on the so-called first report that was signed by Khuba, because I always maintained that I did not know about that report, and therefore I cannot say anything in relation to that report. I can only talk about the report that I had signed and that was submitted to the NPA, and that is the report I was involved with. The other report, I know nothing about it, and I cannot engage on it.
When you explained all of this to them at the meeting, what else did they want to find out from you? One would have thought it became clear you knew nothing about the first report, therefore they shouldn't ask you anything about that. And then if they couldn't ask you anything about the first report, I don't see why they would be able to ask you anything about the second report, because the second report had recommendations.
Yes.
What problem would they have with the recommendations in the second report?
Exactly, Chair. And the interview did not go any further because I got a sense that they were frustrated by the fact that I did not want to engage them on the first report, which I did not know anything about. And because they kept on harping on the issue of altering the report. And I said to them, but I cannot alter something I don't know, something that I've never even seen, you know? So because of my responses to them, they just stopped the interview.
When Mr. McBride gave evidence, I did try to, deal with, to try and get clarification on this concept of altering the report, because it seemed to be central to the whole thing.
Yes.
But as I understand the position now, and you must just tell me if that is your understanding too, there was the so-called first report.
That's correct.
Which recommended that General Dramat and General Biya be charged.
That's correct.
Then there was the second and final report, which recommended that they should not be charged.
That's correct.
These two were separate reports, separate documents.
That's correct.
The one standing on its own, the other standing on its own. Each one having its own status. The first one having a certain status, and the final one having the status of a final report. Is my understanding correct so far?
That's correct, Chair, and I'm surprised that you have such an easy understanding of this thing, because that's exactly what we've been trying to explain.
Yes.
And unfortunately, when people have their own agendas,
yes,
that kind of explanation never flies with them. And that is why the nub of the charges against us, including the criminal charges, was that we've changed the report. We've altered the report.
Yes, I mean, it's what I couldn't understand, because if you're talking about altering a report, changing a report, for me, you are talking about having this document and then changing physically on that document.
Exactly.
If you have one document which says one thing, you have another document which says one thing, you can't be said to have changed that one.
Exactly.
You may be said, you may be said to have made a recommendation that is different from the one made in the first report. So that's fine. And so what?
And Chair, in our craft as investigators, it's not unusual that you would have a change of opinion in your investigation based on the evidence you have at that point in time. At a particular point, I might have a particular set of evidence which, when looked on its own, may want me to come to a particular conclusion. But at some point, I can have further evidence which at that point may make me conclude differently. There is nothing wrong with that. And we as investigators, we make recommendations, Chair. I'm a former prosecutor. And as a prosecutor, you look at the evidence that is contained in the docket. And that is the basis on which you make a decision whether to prosecute or not. You can look at a memorandum or a recommendation or whatever you want to call it from an investigator, but that does not inform your decision as a prosecutor, because your decision must be based on what evidence is contained in the docket. Even if we were to say there were two separate reports with two separate recommendations, those cannot in any way influence the decision of the NPA, because the NPA must make their decision based on the evidence that is contained in the docket. There's no allegation that we removed evidence from the docket. The allegation is that we altered a report. Now, I cannot alter a report that I have not seen in the first place. But also importantly, in the discovery in the criminal investigation that they did against us, one of the senior advocates in the NPA actually deposed a statement to say that he does not even remember seeing the report, that so-called first report in the docket. But even if he had, it means nothing to him, because he does not make his decision based on such a report. He makes his decision based on what is contained in the docket. However, the NPA charged us for fraud that we tried to misrepresent to the prejudice of the NPA. How is that possible?
Yeah, you see, I mean, everybody should know that an investigator, might have different views at different stages of investigations about whether somebody was involved in a crime or not, and whether they should be charged, and so on and so on. But that's not something that's confined to investigators. Exactly. I mean, a lawyer who is consulted by a client will have a certain view at a certain time. Exactly. About how good that client's case is. Exactly. But later on, he or she can change that view, depending. He or she can change that view if there is additional evidence. Exactly. But he or she can change that view even if there is no additional evidence. Exactly. By simply reflecting further. Exactly. On the same evidence. Exactly. Judges do the same thing. I mean, you and Mr. McBride have told me certain things about this issue. On my mind, prima facie, I have certain views, and they might be apparent from some of my questions. Yes. But I haven't made a final decision. And when those people come here and give evidence, who knows, maybe they can change my mind and show me that actually you people did something terrible. Exactly. Exactly. But as things stand, I can't understand what the whole issue was about. Exactly. And so even if there were two views, one saying General Sbi and General Dramat must be charged, and the later one saying they mustn't be charged, it's two views, and I would have thought that it would have been apparent from a proper reading of the second report that there was something additional to what had been there when the first report was made.
Exactly.
And that on its own should have told anybody that that must be the reason why the recommendation is different. And then why there was a need to appoint a law firm to investigate that before IPID was asked to explain this is something that I hope somebody will explain to me in due course. Yes, you may proceed, Ms.
Chair,
Felser.
it gets worse. We've made recommendations that Colonel Maluleke Khuba be charged criminally. The NPA, on its wisdom at the time of former NDPP Sean Abrams and other prosecutors that were dealing with this, decided to prosecute General Dramat and General Sibia the same way they decided to prosecute us. The case against us were withdrawn. The cases against General Dramat and Sibia were also withdrawn. It's only Colonel Maluleke Khuba who's still facing criminal charges in line with our own recommendations. Now, there's an acknowledgement by NPA that actually what we've recommended, it's a correct position because there isn't evidence that can sustain criminal charges against General Dramat and General Sibia.
But in the meantime, you were put through a certain process.
That is correct, Chair.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sesoko, when did you first learn about the Worksman's report?
Chair, I think it was around April when the report was released. It was on a Sunday. I was in church, so when I'm in church, my phone is always off. And when I got out of church, I opened my phone, and for the first time, my phone was so busy because it was just messages and missed calls. And when I checked, I find it was family members, friends, people who know me, who were saying there's a report in the Sunday Times. I think it was on the first page, alleging wrongdoing against me, McBride and Mr. Khuba. And upon seeing these messages, I then sent my son to go and get me the newspaper. And for the first time, I then realized that Werksmans has released the report. Now, as people who are implicated in the report, no one dared to contact us about this. The journalists that were writing the story, Mzilgazwa Africa from the Sunday Times, as well as Mr. Hofstadter, never bothered to contact us about this report, which was making adverse findings against us. These are the very same journalists, Chair, who made reports on the SARS rogue unit, also on the General Boysen's issues with Katomen, the same journalists. So to me, it looks like they were working with particular people within the cluster to push a particular agenda and to deal with us because we were not compliant to the agendas that they needed to achieve.
Mr.
Yes.
Sesoko, is it the same journalists that you referred to in paragraph 29 of your statement when you said that you were alerted to a media inquiry that the journalists had a copy of the so-called first report of Mr. Khuba?
That is correct, Chair. Because also what we must ask ourselves is, how did the journalists come into possession of that report, which Mr. Khuba had only shared with Advocate Musi? As I've indicated that as IPID, we never shared such a report, at least from what Mr. Khuba said. He only shared that report with Advocate Musi. The only report that we gave to the minister is the report that was signed by all of us and the NPA, and that was sent also to the NPA.
Now, the official date of release of the Worksman's report, so after it was leaked, is the 24th of April 2015. The report is Annexure MS2 at page 62. Could you just confirm that?
That is correct.
What then happened after the release of this report?
After,
Well, before we get to what happened after, what was the finding of this report in relation to your role? Insofar as you are concerned, what did it find in regard to yourself?
Chair, the report made a finding that I'm guilty of defeating the ends of justice.
Yes,
And extortion, I think,
yes,
by altering the report.
yes,
Despite the fact that,
yes,
even from the interviews, I mean, when you read the report, Chair, you can't find even a connection. I tried to find a connection. How do they come to that conclusion based on what was presented on them? I can't find it. But the report concludes
yes.
in that fashion.
Well, I think the relevant people from Workmen's will have to come and explain some of the findings that they made, make me understand their findings. It's just difficult to understand how you can say somebody who was party to the preparation and production of one report and was not involved in any way on the production of another report can be said to have altered the first report. It's just something I have immense difficulty understanding. But again, maybe when they come, they will be able to explain it to me, and maybe I will understand it. But that's the finding they made against you.
Yeah. I hope they do, Chair, because also what I take umbrage with the attorney who dealt with this report, Ms. Sandijule, the least I would have expected was that the fact that they assured me that my basis of participation in that interview with them, it's not about making such findings. At least at the time when they were doing their report and they think that they want to make such finding, to have an audacity to come to me and say, based on the evidence that we have, we think we are going to make findings against you. Do you have anything, any representation or anything you want to say in relation to that?
Yes.
That never happens.
Effectively, what you are saying is, after you had met with them and you had told them that you had nothing to do with the first report and therefore could not say anything about it, you had something to do with the second report. If after that they had met with witnesses and obtained statements from witnesses who said you were involved in that way, or in any other way, on the basis of which they could recommend criminal charges or disciplinary steps, the least they could have done is to come back to you and say, since our last meeting, we have obtained the following.
Yes.
Or we have reflected on what you said, and we have this to put to you. What do you say about this? Because we might make findings that could go against you. That's what you are saying, and you say they didn't do that.
They didn't do that, Chair. And that's a basic tenet of
Yes.
Our law.
Yes. Yes, continue.
Thank you. Could you have regard to...
Sorry, Chair, I think I need to also
Yes.
indicate this, that at the criminal proceedings against us, on the day that, because we've been insisting that this matter must go on trial, and the NPA was dilly-dallying, didn't want to go on trial, we were ultimately able to force them to agree to a trial date. On the day that the matter was supposed to be tried, the prosecutor from the NPA, Advocate Maema, then tells the magistrate that the witnesses are not there, and that one of their witnesses, Mr. Sandile July, who authored this report, is refusing to testify. And he has threatened the NPA that if they can force him to testify, he will take them to court. Now, we found ourselves in the situation that we were on the basis of this report. But the author of the report says, I'm not going to testify, and even threatens the NPA to take them to court if they try to force him to testify. Now you ask yourself, why then? Why make such a report, but you can't stand by it?
Well, I have instructed the legal team and the investigation team to secure the relevant files and dockets relating to the criminal proceedings relating to you and Mr. McBride, and Mr. Khuba was also charged, isn't it? Yes. I've said that I want to see exactly what documents the person who made the decision that you be charged had before him or her. I will want that person to come and give evidence. Maybe they will be able to show that there were proper grounds for the decision to charge, and if that is so, it's important that their side of the story be heard. But if there were no proper grounds, it would be, to say the least, most regrettable that people were put through this process without such grounds. So that process is happening to obtain those dockets and files, and the relevant people will be asked to come and give evidence so that I can understand properly, because there certainly is an allegation that sometimes the police were used, sometimes the NPA were used, sometimes all of them were used improperly in order to deal with certain individuals who may not have been prepared to do certain things. And that's a serious allegation against these very important institutions, the police and the NPA, and it should not be made unless it has proper grounds. And if it is made, it must be investigated properly, because if it is found to be well-founded, then something quite serious should be done, because we can't afford to have these institutions being manipulated or used for improper motives and agendas. So that's part of the reason why I want to see all of those things.
Yes, and we will make sure that we get all those things to you.
Yes, please, yeah.
Can we go back to paragraph 36? Could you tell the Chair what happened on the 11th of May 2015? So this is just a few weeks after the 24th of April 2015, which is the date of the Worksman's report.
On the 11th of May, Chair, I was called by the Acting Executive Director, Mr. Khamanyani, and in that meeting, which I recorded, Chair, he had indicated that he's intending to suspend me. In fact, he gave me a letter of his intention to suspend me. Now, I think it's important, Chair, that I indicate to you that prior to this incident, myself and Mr. Khamanyani enjoyed quite a cordial relationship as colleagues. In fact, in my prior role as the provincial head for Northwest, I would even assist him in after he was appointed the provincial head for Free State, in setting up his office, assisting him with personnel from my office so that he can assist him to be able to manage the office properly. So I regarded him as one of those close colleagues. And when I sat with him on this day and he was saying that he intends to suspend me, I was taken aback, especially coming from him, and him knowing the kind of person I am. And I even asked him, but you're doing this to me. And he said to me, Chair, in a vernacular, that, when you join the police and they tell you to go and arrest, your father, you must do it. So in the context of our conversation, it was clear to me that he was saying that he has been instructed by the minister to suspend me. And I accepted that it's going to happen. And what was interesting also in our conversation is that he specifically asked me about two specific high-profile investigations that we're busy with. The Pandey matter, which General Boysen has testified to this commission about.
Yes.
Now, that matter, Chair, was initially investigated by the Hawks in KZN. But because of the interference with their investigation in that matter, the matter was then reported to us by Parliament. Then that's how we got involved in that investigation. We requested the dockets from the Hawks, and they provided us with all these dockets. And upon perusing that, it was clear that there was large-scale corruption by members of the SAPS and a service provider there, Mr. Pandey, with millions of rands. But there was also a memo there authored by one of the prosecutors where they were basically declining to prosecute some of these cases. We wrote to the NDPP that that decision must be reviewed. We also conducted some of investigations that were standing in collaboration with the members of the Hawks, and then we forwarded these matters to the NPA. Mr. Ngasana then appointed a prosecutor to look at this matter. It was clear that this is one of the politically charged investigation. The initial prosecutor who was involved actually backed down on the matter. And we had a meeting with the...
You mean when you say initial prosecutor, you mean the one who declined to prosecute? Or
No, the one that was
appointed by Mr.
The one that was appointed by Mr. Ngasana.
Or he or she backed
yeah,
off?
she backed down on the matter.
Yes.
And then we had a discussion with Mr. Ngasana, and then we we then said we must look at a prosecutor who has the zeal and who's not
courage.
afraid to deal with such matters. And then the name of Advocate Khairinel came up. And Advocate Ngasana then, in terms of their own processes, appointed him with the necessary delegations to deal with,
Yes.
with this matter. So at the time when I had these engagements with Mr. Khamanyani, and realizing how things were panning out, we had already taken all these dockets to Advocate Khairinel to be able to make a decision. In fact, he had already consulted with some of the witnesses and he was ready to proceed with one of the dockets. I think it's Devon Central 446 of bribery by Madu to General Poison. And so when I was asked by Mr. Khamanyani about specifically these cases, and the other one was in relation to General Mabula and his team, and the allegations there were allegations of torture and murder. And we had, at that time, recently received an audio recording as well as a transcription of that audio from General Poison by one of the members of who was involved with that team, who basically was telling how people were tortured and one of the suspects killed. So when I was asked about these cases, I thought that maybe the acting executive director wanted to prioritize maybe these investigations. To my surprise, when we came back, nothing had happened on these investigations.
So, are you saying that on the day that you had a meeting with Mr. Khamanyane, when he gave you the notice of intention to suspend you, that's the day that's the occasion when he asked you about these investigations?
Specifically about these matters.
The way in which he asked you, did it make you to think that he was trying to plan what would happen in case you were suspended?
Yes.
Or, yes. Okay.
To me, that was the clear intention, because why specifically these cases? You know, I mean, there were a number of cases that we're dealing with. Why specifically these ones? So it was clear that he had an interest specifically on these ones. And the question is why he had interest in these specific cases.
One theory could be that now that you were likely going to be suspended, he had to make arrangements for somebody to handle these matters. Obviously, he had to make sure that all the matters that you were handling should be handled by somebody. Things should not be at a standstill while you were on suspension. That's one theory, but depending on the facts, one could have had a situation where maybe they were a factor in what was happening, but that doesn't seem to to have been what was in your mind. Was in your mind was that he specifically wanted to make arrangements for after you had gone.
If you want to be generous, Chair, is that theory that he wanted to make sure that these matters were dealt with, so that in my absence, someone deals with these matters. But the fact of the matter is, 18 months later after we came back, no such thing happened. So if there was that kind of concern, why is it that they were not prioritized and dealt with accordingly? And I had to start when I came back to make sure that these matters are pursued to their logical conclusion.
Okay.
And just to clarify, this meeting took place on the 11th of May 2015, and when you were ultimately reinstated, it was, as you say, 18 months later, the 23rd of November 2016.
That is correct.
Now,
Well, I'm sorry, there in that paragraph 36, apart from the Pandey matter, you refer to the other matter as the General Jan Mabula Tim matter, is that correct?
That is correct, Chair. That is the one I'm referring to as the torture and
Yes.
murder case.
Yes.
Incidentally, we've received recently a decision to prosecute these police officer, General Mabula and his team, on those torture matters.
Yes.
And on the murder case, the NPA is considering centralizing this murder and torture case because they are related to each other and to prosecute them as well.
You have said that in regard to the Pandey matter, the matter was had political connections. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yes. The other one, did it also have political connections, or not really?
Not really, Chair, but this Mabula team, as it will become apparent in my further testimony here, is that this is the team that has been used to disrupt people like us who's trying to fight, deal with issues of corruption and so forth. It's the very same team when we are investigating allegations of corruption against General former National Commissioner General Pahlani that were brought in to interfere with our investigation. In fact, we had to go to court to interdict them from doing so, which court case we won with costs against them and the police.
Yes, I think Mr. McBride did give evidence about that team as well. Yes. Just on your meeting with Mr. Khamanyane, you said that he said to you that you know that when you join the police, when you are told to go and arrest, you go and arrest. And then you made a certain inference from that. And you said it became clear to you that he had been instructed by the minister. Do you want to talk more about that? Why the minister? Why would you particularly bring the minister into that?
Chair,
if he didn't mention the minister.
Earlier we spoke about the appointment to that acting position. And you rightly point out that at executive management, no one was appointed but him. Just prior to that, we have in IPID what we call MENCO. That is the management committee meeting, where all the executive management and the provincial heads sit and discuss issues relating to the departmental operations and so forth. And in that meeting, the executive director had asked us to discuss this issue of the rendition case. And what we realized when we were engaging with colleagues in terms of this matter was that Mr. Khamanyane, who is normally very talkative in that kind of setup, was completely quiet in that meeting. And then a month or so later, when after McBride is suspended, he's appointed to act. Now, you must understand that there's been always a contact with Khuba, and Khuba will testify to this by not only Mr. Sandile July, but also the minister himself, that you must go and talk to the Wetsman people. So when you connect all these dots, and also when Khuba was served with the suspension letters, the head of corporate services, Ms. Netsianda, was instructed to go and serve him. And he made it clear to Mr. Khuba that the instruction that came was that the minister wanted him to be served on that particular day. So it was clear that these instructions were not Khamanyane's doing per se, but he was receiving instruction. And I surmise that that was the only reason he was appointed, so that he can execute a particular agendas that were wanted by the then minister.
In any event, is the position that the minister, the person that the minister needs to talk to in regard to IPID matters would be the executive director?
It will be the executive director, that's correct.
So if the minister had to say anything, he would have had to speak to Mr. Khamanyane as the acting executive director.
That is correct.
Okay.
Thank you. For completeness, the minute of this discussion that you had on the 11th of May 2015 is Annexure MS3, and you'll find it at page 137.
That is correct.
And if you have a look at page 139, is the statement at around line 10 what you were referring to about, which gave you the impression that the instructions came from above?
That is correct.
There's a reference there in that line 10 to chief. Do you know who that reference relates to? Who was Mr. Khamanyane referring to as chief there?
No, when he said chief, was referring to me, sir.
Oh, okay.
That's how we used to
call each other.
Call me. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine.
And he also, you'll see, he said there at the probably line about 14, 15, it says at the end, so it is a difficult one, a very, very difficult one.
That is correct. Because you see, hence I'm saying in the context of our
Your relationship.
Engagement and our relationship, it was clear to me that he also had difficulty doing this.
Doing this, yeah.
You know, but because he had an instruction to do it, he had to do it because that's the reason he's occupying that position at that point in time.
Okay.
You also say earlier on the page at 139 to him, you say, I understand your position because probably, obviously, you are being instructed to give us this notice of suspension. And I do not expect to get a different outcome after that, no matter what representation.
Yes, because it was clear to me, Chair, that, it's a foregone conclusion where this is going. So, and I was very frank with him because it was someone, as I said, I was close to, and I was very frank with him. And it was clear. I mean, he never disputed what I was saying to him. In fact, even after I received that, and I engaged my legal team, and we wrote to him reasons why I shouldn't be suspended. And they were very compelling reasons. But we knew that it's not going to give us a different outcome, you know. And in terms of the SMS handbook, which was used to do this process, it's very clear under what circumstances do you suspend a person, you know. In this instance, for instance, SMS handbook will say, if, for instance, there's a suspicion that you will interfere with investigation and so forth, then that's when you can be, or you'll interfere with the investigation, that's when you'll be suspended. In this instance, there was already a Werksman report, so the investigation basically was done. So there was really no basis to suspend us. And these are the issues that we made representations on. But of course, we knew that, you know, I mean, I think the response was a day after we made that. So it was clear there was no application of mind also to what we have said, you know. And we were, in fact, suspended.
So if you have regard to paragraph 37, it's correct that you were then suspended on the 21st of May 2015.
That is correct.
And then on the 7th of July 2015, you were served with a notice to attend a disciplinary inquiry. That's annexure.
I'm sorry, Ms. Wenzel. I think I would like Mr. Sesoko to read to us that part starting from line 9, which relates to how he says Mr. Khamanyane explained his position. I think it's important, including the Setswana version or part, if it is Setswana, at page 139.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah, this thing is Swanali.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Mr. Khamanyane says here, this thing it's Swanali, it's like, as and when utswanzi who confirm you, that is when you are to be confirmed, you are a police officer, and they say that before we can confirm you as a police officer, go and arrest your father. So it is difficult one, a very difficult one.
Yes.
So, and this is in the context of the previous paragraph where I say to him, I understand your position, probably obviously you are being instructed to give us this notice of suspension, and I do not expect a different outcome after that, no matter what representation.
Yes.
And that's when he intervenes in this way.
Yes.
So he basically confirms
what you were
that,
thinking.
Yes, that he's being instructed
Yes.
To suspend us.
Yes. So effectively saying, when you join the police, before they confirm you, if they say, go and arrest your father,
Yes.
you have to go and arrest your father.
Yes. And who are they? They are your superiors.
They are your superiors.
And in this instance, who's Khamanyane's superior as the
Yes.
acting executive director? Is
Yes.
the minister.
It's the minister. Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So on 7th of July 2015, you were served with a notice to attend a disciplinary inquiry. It's annexure MS4 on page 159, is that correct?
That is correct.
And then you also then received a charge sheet, which is MS5 on page 162.
That is correct.
And what were those charges?
Chair, should I read the charges?
Yes.
Yes, unless they are too long, then you can just mention the essential allegations.
You can just summarize.
Yeah, maybe the essential allegations without necessarily reading
Yes.
all of them, to say, charge one was that, the allegation was that it was fraud and that this is what I'd done according to them, or something to that effect. If it's going to be easy, if it's going to be difficult, maybe you can read it.
Chair, I think, as I said earlier, the nub of the charges, and maybe I should read them, Chair.
Yes, that's fine.
There's also a quote on page 11 of your affidavit, if that's of assistance to you, from the charge sheet.
Yes, I think, Chair, when you look at Annexure 162, those are the criminal charges.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then on my statement on on 38, it's more about the disciplinary.
Yes.
So when you look at 38, the disciplinary charge, and in fact at 39, the disciplinary charge, you'll see it says, you, Sesoko, and McBride altered the report which had been handed over to the NPA and deleted information incriminating Lieutenant General Anwar Dramat, the former national head of DPCI, and or Sibia, the provincial head of DPCI Gauteng, from the report in order to reach a conclusion that Dramat and Sibia have been exonerated by IPID, when you knew or ought to have known that the final IPID report of January 2014 recommended that Dramat and Sibia be criminally charged. By altering the report of January, you and Sesoko have made yourself guilty of dishonesty and defeating the ends of justice. So that was the nub of the disciplinary charge against us.
So the allegation that you had altered the first report was a pillar of the charges.
That was the pillar of the charges, Chair.
Yeah.
And no matter how much we tried to explain these issues, even at the disciplinary, it was clear that the intention has already been made, or the decision has already been made that we must be removed, because no one was willing to listen to that, despite what the Act, IPID Act says in relation to how we do our work, despite what the IPID regulation says in relation to how we do our work, despite what our internal standard operating procedure says how we do our work, no one was willing to look at that.
And I see that in the charge sheet, they said you were guilty of defeating the ends of justice.
Yes.
You were charged with defeating the ends of justice by recommending in the second report that General Dramat and General Sibia should not be charged.
Yes.
But actually your position was that you were actually ensuring that there was justice.
Exactly.
Because if they were charged, that would be an injustice.
Exactly, Chair.
And ultimately, the NPA itself, which was charging you with this charge,
Yes.
dropped charges against the two of them,
Exactly, Chair.
therefore confirming that you were seeking to ensure that there was justice,
Exactly, Chair.
because
Exactly
they
the
wouldn't have
position that
withdrawn
we
those charges if they thought that would not accord with justice.
That is correct, Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Sesoko, the charge sheet in the disciplinary hearing is at page 198, if you could just confirm that.
Page?
198, it's annexure
Yes, that is correct.
MS9.
That is correct.
Now, what was the ultimate result of your disciplinary hearing?
Chair, I was dismissed on the 16th of August when I was in hospital. I was hospitalized for depression. Because what had happened is that the disciplinary inquiry was set down for about a week. And the days prior to the 16th, it was clear to me that no matter what defense we are putting, no matter what evidence we're trying to show, there was no interest in that. Now, when I left the disciplinary hearing on the 15th, I was not well. I actually did not even realize that I was depressed. And when I got home, my wife said, you know, you're not fine. I must take you to a doctor. Went to a doctor, and then the doctor said, you are not well at all, you are depressed. And then he gave me some medication to be able to sleep, with an instruction that first thing in the morning, I must go to a psychiatrist. He wrote a referral letter. And I went to consult a psychiatrist who then immediately had me admitted in hospital for depression. I spent 2 weeks in hospital on depression. While that happens, the disciplinary on the other side continues. My legal team informs me that it was clear to them that no matter what happens, that disciplinary was supposed to end on that day. No matter how much they tried to put forth that I'm not well and I'm in hospital, that was not taken into account. In fact, they say to me that they even suggested that the matter be temporarily adjourned so that they can try and get hold of me, wherever I was, to bring me so that the chairperson could see my condition. And that was also refused. So I never got to testify because I was in hospital. I never got to mitigate because my legal team informed the chair that we need to take instruction on mitigation. That never happened. And as a result of that, I was dismissed in my absence. It was a really traumatic event for me and my family.
And then there was an arbitration.
There was an arbitration subsequent to that. And then my legal team and the employer reached a settlement agreement that I be reinstated. I must hasten to say, Chair, that I was convicted on the basis of a testimony of one witness, Advocate Musing. Now, the charge against me, as you would have realized, Chair, is that I altered a report. Advocate Musing never gave any testimony that I altered the report. In fact, when my legal team challenged him on this issue to say, does he know whether I altered the report? He said, no, I don't know if you altered the report, except what I heard from Mr. Khuba. That was his response. So, from a simple legal logic, you can't charge me for altering a report, and there is no evidence that is placed before a disciplinary inquiry that says I've altered a report. At best, you have a hearsay of Musing who says he would have heard that from Mr. Khuba, and Mr. Khuba is not even called to confirm that he would have said that to Advocate Musing. And the employer closes his case on the basis of that evidence, and I'm found guilty of these charges. That's how absurd this whole disciplinary process was.
As I said earlier on, there was, I indicated, I think in April, that the question of whether or not I can hear that evidence and make any finding is something to be subjected to a certain process.
Yes.
So I've heard it, but I won't do anything about it until that process has happened. As I indicated earlier on, from the statement, it appeared that there was nothing more being said than simply that a hearing took place in my absence. This is what I was charged with. I asked for a postponement. It was refused, and I was found guilty and dismissed in my absence without going beyond that. But I think that we'll subject all of this to that process, whether in the end it should be heard by somebody else, and if so, how, in terms of law, is something that must still be looked at and submissions be made. But yes, okay, let's continue.
What happened with the disciplinary proceedings against Mr. Khuba?
Chair, around September, when the disciplinary was set to continue.
Well, maybe I must ask you, since Mr. Khuba is going to come and give evidence, don't you want him to talk about what happened to his one?
Yes.
Or is there some connection that
there is a connection.
some connection? Okay,
Yes.
all right.
Around September, Chair.
Which year are we? 2015?
2015.
Yes.
The disciplinary was supposed to continue. It was now with a different chairperson before Advocate Zondo was appointed to chair. And because at that point I was also hospitalized, I had an accident with my foot and then I had to go for an operation. So because I was not there, then they separated our trials, which is perfectly fine. But then Mr. Khuba reached a plea bargain with the employer. Now, Mr. Khuba will talk to that. I wouldn't want to talk to how that happened. But Mr. Khuba did engage me on the fact that there is this proposal that is put on the table. And we had a very lengthy discussion about it. And my advice to him was that it was a bad idea. And even though his lawyer had indicated to him that it's so that he can get his job back, and it's not like he's admitting to any wrongdoing per se. And what I said, and I remember I said to him, you know, in the work that we do, our reputation and integrity is our currency. And once that is being questioned, then it affects, you know, your career. But be that as it may, he entered into that agreement, and then he was given a written warning. And then we were alerted to the fact that by our national spokesperson that Mzilikazi Africa has made contact with him to say that he will be running a front page article to the effect that it's confirmed McBride lied or something to that effect. And I then contacted Khuba and said, are you aware this is what is happening? And Mr. Khuba was flabbergasted, to say the least, to say, but these people, it means these things, they were doing it in bad faith. And he said, you know, they even made it clear to me that I can even continue to be a witness to you as, in your disciplinary. So I don't understand how this has come about. As a result of that, Mr. Khuba deposed an affidavit confirming what he was saying to me with regard to the circumstances surrounding the plea bargain that he did with the employer and our role in the whole thing. And immediately upon Mr. Kamanyane becoming aware of that affidavit, Mr. Khuba was summarily dismissed without a hearing. Remember, that process had ended and he was given a written warning. And then he's now summarily
And his
dismissed.
suspension was uplifted.
Was uplifted, he was
Yes,
supposed, yes, he was now back, he's now back at work.
Yes, yes.
But because he had deposed that affidavit,
Yes.
then he is
was dismissed.
summarily dismissed. Now, it became clear to us that because of that affidavit, the story that Mzilikazi Africa was saying he was going to run
Could no longer be run.
never came to fruition as he had hoped he would. There was a story that was run, but it was no longer as it would have been had this affidavit not come through. So, and I think the powers that be were very upset about this. And hence, Mr. Khuba was dismissed summarily without following any process.
Whereas with regard to other situations when there were allegations of misconduct, there would be a suspension first before there would be a disciplinary hearing. On this occasion, there was no suspension, there was no disciplinary hearing, he was just fired.
He was just fired, nothing whatsoever. I mean, you'd have expected that they would then issue him with a notice of the intention to take disciplinary action against him and make allegations, what are the allegations. If the allegation is that he has deposed an affidavit, then let him say so. But nothing of that nature happened.
Yes.
Chair, is it a convenient time to take the lunch adjournment?
Yes, where are we on the statement now? How far are we? Are we at 10?
We're going to now proceed on page 13 from about paragraph 49.
Okay, no, that's fine. We'll continue. If it looks like we might not be as fast as we were hoping to be, I think that the evidence is important and it justifies it, but we'll see after lunch how it goes. In the end, we must make sure that justice is done to his evidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
We'll take the lunch adjournment now, and we'll resume at 2 o'clock.
Thank
We
you.
adjourn.
All